Mention the 965 and most enthusiasts in Porsche circles will think you're talking about the 964 Turbo 3.6. However, despite a lot of parts for the 964 Turbo 3.6 being stamped with 965, Porsche's actual 965 was a stillborn project originally intended to succeed the 959 supercar, and that car was this. Affectionately known here at Porsche, this is the Black Bomber. It's the last remaining prototype of the 965. As I say, the super sports car that was originally intended to replace the GOAT, the 959. Work actually started on the 965 project back in 1984. Now, for historical context, that's around about the same time Porsche was a fair way down the road with development of the 959. Now, as I say, the 965 really was intended to replace the 959 down the line as more of an affordable but ultra high performance sports car. This again off the backdrop of the fact that the 930 Turbo had been in production for around 15 years now. So this really was intended to sit above the 930 Turbo but below the 959, again as this kind of all-round indomitable Porsche super sports car. The 959 was the uber Porsche, but its price meant it was far removed from reality for most of the company's clientele. The 965 Super Turbo project was developed therefore to pass down some of that trailblazing technology, including active all-wheel drive and self-leveling suspension, albeit at a friendlier price point. Porsche also wanted the 965 project to bear the fruits of its twin-clutch transmission research pioneered on the 956 and 962 race cars. The plan was for this to be optional on the 965, along with other things like air suspension. Porsche earmarked a release date of 1990 for the 965, which for production purposes was to be called the 969. This because it was melding the 964, the platform on which the 965 was to be built, with technology from the 959. Porsche earmarked sales of around 2,500 units with a price point of 180,000 Deutschmarks, less than half the original price of that 959. As we'll find out, production of the 965 or 969 was never realised. 16 prototypes were used for development by Porsche, but only one remains. Version L7 from 1988, which is the very car you see here. And Nineworks would like to thank the kind folks at the Porsche Museum for access to the car and allowing us to tell its story. As you can tell from this mule, it has more than a passing nod to the 959 in terms of how it looks. And like the 959, it has electronically controlled suspension and four-wheel drive. Why is this Type 965 prototype in matte black? Well, the reason is this car was physically out in testing on the public road in the mid-80s. This is way before the time of crazy wraps disguised in shape and form of prototype sports cars. So Porsche just elected to paint what is, again, to all intents and purposes, a 959 mule matte black. Again, there's more than a passing resemblance of that overall 959 shape with these front lights, maybe a bit of 993 in there. The front PU, again, in terms of form, is quite reminiscent of the 928, which was the transaxle car of the time. If we come back, again, it's clearly a G-body car with rain gutters. The 959 removed the rain gutters, didn't it? I mentioned the extensive testing on the chassis and drivetrain of the Project 965. Don't know why that's so hard to say, but it's at the back of the car where things get super interesting. You can see here, for example, there's a knacker duct clearly taped up. Porsche at the time didn't want the public to see that. But under what is, again, in terms of form, the fixed profile and aerodynamic aid of the 959, under what looks like a generic G-series deck lid, we have a beating heart with a difference. And that's because what is underneath a stupendously heavy deck lid, we have not an air-cooled and naturally aspirated flat six that you might usually find shoehorned into the back of a 911, prototype or otherwise. We have a water-cooled V8 engine supplied by Porsche's friends at Audi. This is one of many engines that were tested for Project 965, including a 3.4 litre twin-turbo engine, a V8 water-cooled engine developed by Porsche, as well as this engine from Audi, which was used in the Black Bomber for radiator testing in the mid-80s. Unbelievably, Porsche says it was its own V8 engine that was destined to sit in the back of production 965s. Again, a hell of a departure from the usual flat six that we see here, with a touted top speed of 290 kilometres an hour. So very nearly 200 mile an hour in the mid-80s. Sensational statistics. However, as we know, the project was canned and a V8 911 was never to be. I need to put this heavy deck lid down. As if the rear of the car wasn't interested enough, the Black Bomber was actually developed to test radiators. Behind this front PU, you'll find not flat radiators, but cylindrical radiators. That's right, it means the Type 965 was set to become the first fully water-cooled Porsche 911, nearly a full decade before the 996. The reason for this push towards water cooling here was because Porsche wanted to utilise 4-valve technology, and engine developers knew this was only really possible with water-cooled cylinder heads, as we saw with the 959, which is technically the only Porsche to be both air and water cooled, by the way. Right then, inside Project 965 really is an amalgamation between, well, G Series and 964, 959. The centre console has definitely got 959 influence over it, including the four-wheel drive system here. The prototype here saying heck on the right hand side, which means rear, and left, and bug on the left hand side, which, well, I don't know what that means. There are other bits and pieces in here which, again, it's what I love about these prototypes. They really are just time warp cars. An engineer has clearly made some notes above the heating system here. The clocks themselves are more 964, which was obviously introduced at the end of the 1980s rather than 959. The wheel is again G Series or 959. The seats as well are from the G Series, they're sport seats, also put in the 959. The 959 was clad in leather for the comfort option. It was the sports that came with the cotton seats, as here. As we know, Project 965 was scrapped, but that didn't render prototype L7 completely superfluous. The Mule was used as a platform for the continuing exploration of water cooling with a rear engine design, with particular reference to thermal efficiency. This right here was Porsche's first step towards the future. Alas, Project 965 unfortunately was canned in December 1988 by then CEO Ulrich Bez, who cited spiralling costs, something else the 965 has in common with the GOAT, the 959. As I mentioned, the 965 was from the outset intended to replace the 911 Turbo. With the 965 canned though, Porsche reintroduced the Turbo rather hastily, first of all, for the Gen 1 964, which was the 930 engine put into the 964 body, before, if you like, the proper take on the 964 generation turbo with the 3.6 litre car. History would turn in a different direction, but what Project 965 did show is, as ever, just what's possible with the 911 platform. It does make you wonder, therefore, what a 911 with a V8 engine would really have been like.